Well, good morning, everyone. It's good to see you today. If I haven't had a chance to meet you yet, my name is Jake, and I'm so glad that you have joined us. I want to begin with a little bit of a life update, a personal life update, and I'll tie it to the message in just a second. But some of y'all are aware of this, some of y'all aren't. But my dad was diagnosed with cancer again back in at the end of May. It's his bile duct cancer, and so in June he had surgery, and they removed the bile duct, and that was cancerous, and then his gallbladder and a third of his liver, and it's a big surgery. There were some complications off that surgery, and he ended up spending about 3 weeks in the hospital, and there's a part of that was got pretty scary. But he's doing better now. He's home, and for those who are aware of this and been praying, I just want you to know thank you for the prayers. He's doing better. He's recovering, regaining strength. That's all good. He actually is about to start his cancer treatment, and so one of the things I wanted to ask y'all to do is just to pray for the treatment, for him to get the treatment that he needs, and for God to use it to heal him completely of this cancer. So anyways, just quick update on that. The hope is, God willing, he's actually scheduled to preach here on August 3rd. And so we'll see how he's doing. Caroline is getting married on August 2nd. And so all the staff, Caroline and Isaac. So all staff will be at that wedding. We'll come back that night. We'll be here at church, but I didn't want to preach today. So I thought maybe my dad could come. So hopefully you'll get to see my dad and let him know you've been praying for him. It should be a great time. But tying this to the message, during June and during especially the kind of scary part of when it wasn't looking real good for him on the recovery of the surgery, I got a little sentimental, and I started going back and just like revisiting a lot of the old talks that he gave. It turns out that when your dad is a pastor for 40 years, like my dad is, there is a lot of content you can revisit. So, I was going through some of the stuff, but I was really drawn to one particular talk that he gave just 2 weeks before he retired. And this talk that he gave, he was giving to pastors, and the specific topic was basically everything that he really wanted to pass on from his 40 years of ministry to pastors, like his biggest lessons from that. And so the talk was like 12 hours long. Let me kill this mic. All right. This one live? There we go. All right. So the talk was like 12 hours long. That was a joke. I missed it, the stupid mic. I had a chance to. It wasn't 12 hours long. It was about just 30 minutes, but I remember being in the room and hanging on every word and writing it down as much as possible. And so when I went back to revisit my notes on that talk, I had a lot to look at. And again, when I was reading through it, I just hanging on every word. It's, last words. In this case, last words before he retired, the last time he addressed pastors in this setting, they just carry a lot of weight. Like he's trying to convey something really important. You just know it's so significant. Last words carry a lot of weight, whether they're the last words before you retire or especially maybe last words before you die, right? The tie-in is that today we wrap up 2 Timothy. And we're going to be looking in chapter 4 at literally the very last words that the Apostle Paul, the last recorded words that the Apostle Paul ever gave. If you remember, 2 Timothy is the last letter that he wrote. He was writing it from a Roman jail cell. He knows that his death is coming soon. He even had just said to Timothy in chapter 4, the time of my departure is near. He knows his death is imminent. He writes this letter to his really good friend, Timothy. And at the end of it, these last 14 verses that we're about to look at, he focuses in on one kind of key theme. given the significance of last words, and that this is the Apostle Paul, right? That God has used to get the gospel message to the Gentile world, literally to change the world. Like this is like that we get to see his last recorded words. You think, man, what in the world would he say? Like what, like is he gonna pen this incredible hymn to God, praise to God, or get into some deep theological element? Or what is he gonna use his last recorded words to convey? You know what he focuses on with his last words? Friendship. Friendship. Now, he uses his last words to talk about friends, to address his friends, to share about where his friends are, to share about how his friends had let him down, to share about the friend that stood by him. He talks a lot about friends with his last words. And now I'm going to read this passage for us, and as I do, it's going to feel like there's just a bunch of random tidbits here. You know, this is the conclusion. But I want you to know, there is a lot in this passage we can learn from Paul's last words about friendship. And so if you will, stand with me if you're able for the reading of God's word. We're going to read from 2 Timothy 4, beginning in verse 9. Paul writes to Timothy, "Do your best to come to me quickly. For Demas, because he loved this world, has deserted me, and he has gone to Thessalonica. Crescens has gone to Galatia, and Titus to Dalmatia. Only Luke is with me. Get Mark and bring him with you, because he is helpful to me in my ministry. I sent Tychicus to Ephesus. When you come, bring the cloak that I left with Carpus at Troas, and my scrolls, especially the parchments. Alexander the metalworker did me a great deal of harm. The Lord will repay him for what he has done. You too should be on your guard against him, because he strongly opposed our message. In my first defense, no one came to my support, but everyone deserted me. May it not be held against them. But the Lord stood at my side and gave me strength, so that through me the message might be fully proclaimed, and all the Gentiles might hear it. And I was delivered from the lion's mouth. The Lord will rescue me from every evil attack and will bring me safely to his heavenly kingdom. To him be glory forever and ever. Amen." This is the word of the Lord. All right. So, what can we learn about friendship from Paul's last words? Well, the first thing that I think we can learn from here is that we need friends. We need friends. Now, of course, I know most of us, not all of us, know that friends are important. I'm not blowing your mind with this first point. Oh, really? We need friends? I never knew that. But what's interesting to me as I kind of like chewed on this passage this week is that I think that though we know we need friends, I don't know if we know we need friends like Paul knew he needed friends. Like, I don't know if we prioritize friendship to the degree that is wise and spiritually and emotionally healthy like Paul did. See, if you think about this call, what Paul says here at the end of his letter to Timothy, like this passage begins verse 9, "Do your best to come to me quickly." Like that is pretty wild, given the nature of this whole book that he's just written to Timothy. What's been the theme of this book? You know, keep the faith. It's been endure in the ministry, endure even in the hardship. And remember, Timothy was the pastor of the church in Ephesus. And so he's saying, like, this is what I'm calling you to do. Fan into flame the gifts that God's given you. Keep at it. Keep making disciples. Keep preaching the word in season and out of season. Proclaim the good news. Point to Jesus. Stick with it, man. Stick with it. And with that as the major theme, you would think that the last thing that Paul's going to say to Timothy is, so stay put and keep at it. But instead he says, do your best to come to me quickly. And that was not a small ask. See, Paul wasn't just like a town over, right? This wasn't like, hey, come visit me over the weekend. This was, Timothy, leave Ephesus and come all the way to Rome, it was going to take a lot of time, money, and sacrifice for Timothy to come to Paul. I mean, look, this is just in case you're fuzzy on your world geography. Like this is Ephesus to Rome. Like that is not a short trip. And then you think about Paul also adding in the lines of, oh, and by the way, on your way, why don't you go and grab Mark and stop off in Troas and get this cloak and this reading material. Like this would have taken a long time. And I just think that's interesting. That Paul wouldn't feel like he couldn't ask that. And that instead, he would say, no, this is what I need. I need my friend. See, I feel like one of the things that we can learn from Paul's last words here when it comes to friendship is just the priority of it. And how important it is to have your friends present or to be present with your friends. And there's, I think, a couple of lessons specifically off of that I want to just point out to you, to kind of draw out for us. The first is this. It is that to need or to want deep friendship is not a sign of spiritual immaturity, but maturity. To want and to need a deep friendship is not a sign of spiritual maturity, but maturity. It's not a sign of weakness, but it is a sign of health. I think it's safe to say that the Apostle Paul, being carried along by the Spirit of God and penning this letter, was not writing selfishly or immaturely. That he was voicing a mature, a deeply spiritually correct view. Timothy, this is this important. Do your best to come to me quickly. Desire was not as a result of weakness or selfishness, but spiritual health. See, in Genesis 2, we have one of the great theological oddities in the whole Bible. Because if you remember, Genesis 3 is right where the fall is, where sin enters in, and all the bad things, everything that goes wrong begins in Genesis 3. But up to that, Genesis 1 and 2, everything is perfect. Everything is good. And you have God over and over again saying, it is good, it is good, it is good. Until you get to this point in Genesis 2 where God literally says, it is not good. And again, pre-fall, pre-sin entering the world, he says it's not good. Specifically, he says, it is not good for man to be alone. And that's pretty interesting, right? I mean, think about what that means. It means that Adam was not lonely because he was imperfect. It means he was lonely because he was perfect. That the ache for friends is not the result of sin. That we long for friends because we were made in the image of our triune God. That we were made for community, for deep friendships. And so from the garden in Genesis 2 to a Roman prison cell in 2 Timothy 4, there's a consistent message. That is, we need friends. We need friends. They're that important. You need friends for your spiritual health. And so you will be wise to prioritize them accordingly. The second thing that I think we can learn from Paul's plea to Timothy is that sometimes we need to prioritize friendship over a job. Now, I want to be clear here that I'm being nuanced. I'm saying the word sometimes, and I mean sometimes, okay? But I think that this is worth pointing out in our culture. We live in such an individualistic and career-driven culture that without us even realizing it, we are shaped by that to the point that if you are ever given a job offer somewhere else that's a better job with more money or some kind of promotion, it just feels like a complete given that you're going to take that job. And I would say that sometimes you shouldn't. Sometimes you should. Absolutely, God does lead people away from friendship and community at times to go do something else. I'm going to talk about that in just a minute, okay? But sometimes we just do that not because God wants you to do it, but because we are conforming to the pattern of this world. And one of the worst things that we can do, friends, is to leave deep Christian community to chase after a different job or more money or more whatever success. That is detrimental to your spiritual and emotional and whole self well-being. Because we need friends. And sometimes it's not even a matter of chasing after a new job. It's actually staying at your current job. That if your current job is keeping you from having the time that you need to develop good, deep Christian friendships and community, then it's worth wrestling with to say, I wonder if I should actually look for a different job that would allow me more time to be able to prioritize friendship. Now, listen, all of that is matters of wisdom and listening to God. But my call here from what we learned from Paul is that there are times where the job should take second place to friendships. Again, Timothy had a very important, eternally significant job to do. The pastor of Ephesus. And yet, Paul isn't shy to say, hey, for a season, I need you to leave that job and prioritize being with me. Friendships are that important. Friends, I think there's something here to wrestle with, okay? And if you hear this and you feel a little challenged by it, take that to God. And I would encourage you, take that to some Christian friends, and y'all discuss that together. See, maybe we're overvaluing careers and undervaluing the priority of friendships. Is that true for you? It's worth wrestling with. That's the first thing I think that we can take from Paul's last words. We need friends. It's a sign of spiritual health to need them. And sometimes we need to prioritize them even over a job. Okay, the second thing that we can learn from this passage, you with me? You still good? I came out of the gate swinging a little bit this morning, but all right. Second thing is that he says here about friends actually introduces a tension. In fact, there's two tensions tied to friendships in this passage. And the first one is this: we need friends, but so do others. We need friends, but so do others. See, this is a bit paradoxical given what I just said, but one of the things we can learn from Paul's last words is that there are times when we are to forgo the company of close friends in order to serve others. You look back at verse 9 with me. He says, do your best to come to me quickly. For Demas, because he loved the world, has deserted me and has gone to Thessalonica, which we'll come back to in a minute, so hang on to that. But notice the next part. He says, Crescens has gone to Galatia, Titus to Dalmatia, and then in verse 12 he says, I sent Tychicus to Ephesus. Why did Crescens and Titus and Tychicus all leave Paul? Well, we know Galatia and Dalmatia were places where Paul had previously ministered, and most biblical scholars believe that Paul sent those guys back to those places to strengthen or to extend the gospel work that Paul had established there. And the reason that Paul sent Tychicus to Ephesus was to deliver this letter to Timothy, and most likely to fill in for Timothy in the role of the pastor of Ephesus while Timothy was gone. Now, think about this. All three of those guys were close co-workers and friends of Paul, and yet, instead of keeping them with him, he sends them out to serve others. And we can learn from these last words of Paul that there is a tension here. I want to be careful how I say this, but sometimes being with our friends takes priority. I just saw that. Paul saying to Timothy, come here. But sometimes going to serve, love, befriend, and share the gospel with others, even others you don't know yet, takes priority. Paul isn't shy to say to Timothy, I need you here, but he's also not unwilling to send his friends away to go and serve these other people. In fact, even more than that, he wasn't hesitant to leave his friends many times in his ministry to go take the gospel to others. I mean, if you read through Acts, you see that this was his pattern. He loved the church in Antioch, but he didn't stay there forever because God had called him to get the gospel to the Gentiles. And so he went on his missionary journeys. He loved the church in Thessalonica, but he was only there for a very short time because he had to move on. He loved Timothy, but he eventually left Timothy in Ephesus to minister there. That over and over again, Paul left friends behind to go serve others. And it eventually resulted in him being thrown in jail, probably as the result of Alexander the metalworker that he mentions here, turning him in. That he's out, not living the comfortable life and hanging out with his friends all the time. He's out serving God and suffering as a result and being ostracized by his friends. And yet he's like, clearly from his belief, like it's worth doing that at times. That's what God wants you to do at times. See, one of the hardest things that comes with being a part of a growing church is that we're always needing people who are willing to leave their friends and their midtown communities to start new ones so that others can get connected. Or we need people who are willing to leave their huddles and the deep friendships that they have formed to start new huddles so that others can come and experience deep friendship and discipleship in the way of Jesus. And there's no formula of when you're supposed to leave a group to start a new one. But one thing we can learn from Paul's last words here is that we need to be open to it. Knowing that at times God will lead us to leave a community so that others who aren't in community can be. I know this requires sacrifice. Krista and I have been there so many times. When we started Midtown, we left a really great church with a ton of good friends to move to Central Austin to start Midtown, and it wasn't easy. I mean, we knew that tons of people in Central Austin needed Christian friends who would love them in the name of Christ. And so we left our friends that we loved because others needed friends. And it was hard, but I can say that it has been worth it, and God has blessed us graciously with new friends here, some of the best friends I've ever had in my entire life, but it still was difficult to make that move, to really go and leave what was comfortable and what was good, because friends are good, in order to go minister to people I didn't even know yet. But knowing that God led us at that time to go and do that. Now, thankfully, he led us to go do that with some of our friends. And Paul, in his pattern, you see that often, too. He leaves a lot of his friends. He usually takes some of his friends with him to go start a new work. And so you're not usually leaving everyone, though sometimes even that is the case. Think about what Josh and Kari are getting ready to do, going to plant a house church in Mueller. They're leaving this church that they love to go start this because others need friends who will love them in the name of Christ. I think about what Harrison and Andy did this year, where they left the MC that Chris and I are a part of, and it's the best MC, not just because Chris and I are a part of, but they loved this MC that they were part of. But they left it because they started a new MC on Saturday morning so that others who were not an MC could get connected to that. Sometimes God leads us to leave community, to start community for others, because we need friends, but so do others. My question for you is, could it be that God is calling you to do something similar? So years ago, my dad said something that has always stuck with me. On this topic, he said, as Christ followers, there are times when we are to prioritize mission over community, knowing that as a result of Jesus, we will one day enjoy everlasting community. We need friends, but so do others. This is the second lesson we can learn from Paul's last words. And the third lesson speaks to another tension regarding the topic of friendship, that being our good old friend here, Demas, right? So we need friends, but friends will let us down. We need friends, but friends will let us down. So the main reason Paul gives for why he's asking Timothy to come to him is that almost all of his other friends have left him, to the point that he would say in verse 16, at my first defense, like first trial, no one came to my support, but everyone deserted me. And then we know from verse 10 that one of Paul's friends, Demas, had really hurt him. As he says, Demas, because he loved this world, has deserted me and has gone to Thessalonica. There's a lot of pain in those two statements. We know from Paul's other New Testament letters that Demas had been with Paul for years. Paul mentions him in Colossians and then again in Philemon. He actually, in Philemon, refers to Demas as one of my fellow workers. And so Demas was someone who had traveled and ministered with Paul in his missionary journeys for a while. But here Paul's telling Timothy, Demas has deserted me because he loved the world, or literally he loved this present age. And so Demas didn't just abandon Paul, but he changed what he was living for, that what mattered most to him, that he went from loving Jesus to loving this world. And as a result, he deserted Paul, which I know would have been so incredibly painful. And I know that personally because I've experienced that. I know the pain of serving Jesus with a good friend who began to love what the world had to offer more than Jesus. And as a result, walked away from Jesus and deserted me. I mean, it's one of the most painful things I have ever experienced. And to think that Paul experienced that here while in prison in Rome, about to die. I mean, that's rough. We need friends, but friends will let us down. Demas wasn't the only one that abandoned Paul. Again, in verse 16, he says that when he first stood trial, not a single friend came to his support. Like, can you imagine that? I mean, this is the great apostle Paul, and he didn't have a single friend show up for him to support him while he's on trial. One of my favorite songs is by the band Over the Rhine. And the chorus goes like this. All my favorite people are broken. Believe me, my heart should know. It's a happy song. But man, I feel it every time I listen to it. How do we respond when our friends let us down? The temptation is just to write them off, to disconnect, to try to go without them, right? Or to refuse to put in the work to make new friends or to reconcile with old ones. But notice, even though Paul's friends had let him down, that is not how he responded. He knew he needed friends. And so he pleads with Timothy, do your best to come to me quickly. And he says, get Mark and bring him with you, which is significant because in Acts 13, we're told that Mark abandoned Paul on his first missionary journey. And Paul had refused to take Mark on his second missionary journey because he didn't trust Mark yet. And yet here at the end of his life, Paul is saying to Timothy, hey, come and please bring Mark. See, I think there are two lessons we can learn from Paul's last words here. The first is the importance of grieving. And the second is the importance of forgiving. That when Paul writes about Demas, you can feel his sadness. That he's grieving that his friend has deserted him. He's not keeping it in. He's not refusing to talk about it. He's not denying that it's had effect on him. He's telling Timothy. He's grieving. And when he writes about no one coming to his trial and everyone abandoning him, what does he say? The rest of verse 16 says, may it not be held against them. Put another way, I am not charging their offense against them. I've forgiven them for not showing up. See, Paul grieves and he forgives. He grieves Demas, he forgives Mark and his other friends. If we're going to be friends with imperfect, broken people like all of us, we're going to have to learn how to do both of those things as well. We're going to need to learn to grieve and forgive. That's not easy and that's not fun, but it's essential because we need friends. We weren't made to go through life alone. Contrary to Paul Simon's classic, we're not a rock, we're not an island. See, we were made to image our triune God. And so if we decide that friends aren't worth it, the hassle or the pain, then we're not just missing out on having friends. We are acting contrary to God. Or to quote Tim Keller, he said it kind of jarring. He said, the less you want friends, the less like Jesus you are. That sounds a little like, but the truth is the Apostle Paul wasn't the only tremendously strong, great person who desperately needed friends. There was a greater one, and he had 12 core friends, and they never understood him, and they were continually letting him down. And they denied him and betrayed him and even abandoned him in his greatest time of need. And yet he was constantly spending time with them, sharing his thoughts and his heart with them. And even though they didn't understand most of what he was saying to them until after Pentecost, he continued to spend time with them, love them, and forgive them. See, all of his favorite people were broken. And yet he still called them his friends. Our friends will let us down and hurt us. I wish it wasn't true, but this side of heaven is true. But we need them. And when we love them, and when we grieve how they hurt us, and when we forgive when they fail us, and when then we are in that moment actively being formed into the image of our perfect friend. Which leads us to another lesson we can learn from Paul's last words. And that is, we need friends, and we have a perfect one. Look back at verse 16 with me. At my first offense, no one came to my support, but everyone deserted me. May it not be held against them, but the Lord. But the Lord stood at my side and gave me strength, so that through me the message might be fully proclaimed, and all the Gentiles might hear it, and I was delivered from the lion's mouth. That line, everyone deserted me, but the Lord stood at my side. This week, as I've mulled over that line, I just found myself listening to Ben King's classic, Stand By Me, over and over again. I don't know how many times I've listened to that song this week, a lot. It's so good. But if you're unfamiliar or it's been a while, because it's kind of old, the song begins this way, and I won't sing it because that will not bless anyone. He says, when the night has come and the land is dark, and the moon is the only light we will see. No, I won't be afraid. No, I won't be afraid, just as long as you stand by me. So darling, 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 stand by me. Okay. That's the kind of friend we all need, is it not? That's the kind of friend that we all want. That when life is dark, we need a friend that we know will stand by us. In Jesus, we have that friend. In Jesus, we have the friend that we need. How beautiful is it that these are some of the Apostle Paul's last words? That knowing that he was about to die, he tells Timothy, I was abandoned by everyone, but not Jesus. That Jesus stood by me. He gave me strength. So I was able to fulfill the mission that he'd given me to proclaim the gospel so that all the Gentiles would hear it. And he delivered me, referring to his first trial. He was with me. And then he adds, the Lord will rescue me from every evil attack and will bring me safely to his heavenly kingdom. To him be the glory forever and ever. Amen. He breaks into praise. See, Paul knew that his friend Jesus would rescue him, as Jesus had done many times before in Paul's ministry. But here he also knew his death was imminent. And yet he still says, Jesus will rescue me, even if it is through death. Even when he died, he would live, and he would be brought safely into Jesus' heavenly kingdom. And so he praises Jesus. To him be the glory forever and ever. Friends, Jesus is the only friend that will love us perfectly, faithfully, and fully. And he is the only friend who has the power to rescue us from every evil attack and will, without a doubt, based on his promise, rescue us from death itself. For he, as he said in John 11, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live even though they die. See, Paul knew that. And so he was strengthened. And you can know that too. If you have placed your faith in Jesus to rescue you, then you are promised by him that your sins are forgiven in him. And he is with you now, standing by you as your faithful friend. And he will rescue you even through death and bring you into his heavenly kingdom. Jesus is the perfect friend we all need. And by his grace, through faith, he is the friend you have or can have. But having said that, there's one more lesson from Paul's last words here that I want to point out, and it's a little bit interesting. It's this. We need friends in addition to our perfect friend. We need friends in addition to our perfect friend. Look how Paul wraps up this letter. Verse 19. Greet Priscilla and Aquila and the household of Onesiphorus. Erastus stayed in Corinth, and I left Trophimus sick in Miletus. Do your best to get here before winter. Eubulus greets you, and so does Pudens, Linus, Claudia, and all the brothers and sisters. The Lord be with your spirit. Grace be with you all. It's interesting, isn't it, that after sharing how Jesus stood by him and strengthened him, Paul doesn't say, and so I have all I need. So never mind, Timothy. You don't need to come here after all. Why don't you just stay in Ephesus? No, instead, he does the opposite. He doubles down on his plea, on his request for Timothy to come to him. Do your best to get here before winter. And he says that even though we know from these verses and previous ones that Luke was now, though he had been deserted one time, he had friends around him. Luke was with him. We know that many of the people that he sends greetings from, they're in the church in Rome. They were around Paul enough for him to be like, all right, as I finish this letter, I'm sending greetings from these people. Like, he has some friends around him, and yet he still is saying to Timothy, do your best to come here quickly. Get here before winter. See, Paul had a perfect friend in Jesus, but he still needed his friends, and he still needed to be with Timothy. Because friends are incredibly important. May Paul's last words help move us to put in the time, because it takes time, and to put in the effort, because it takes effort to form and maintain deep friendships. Your life literally will be better if you do. For you were made to need friends. In our church, the best way to do that, best way to develop friends is by joining a Midtown community. Yes, joining one will require you to give up a night of your week or a Saturday morning of your week if you join the K's. And yes, joining an MC, it's uncomfortable initially because you don't know anybody, and it takes time to form the friendship. But you get around people, you begin to have the opportunity to develop friends. It is worth it. And guys, forming deep friendships, it's going to require you to stick around for a while, to put down roots. And that feels sacrificial in our day and age, but it's worth it because friends are that important. And developing deep friends, it's going to require you to have to grieve at times and to forgive at times. But it's worth it because friends are that important. I hope you can see that because the last recorded words of the Apostle Paul make that extremely clear. We need friends.